Hello and welcome to StorSimple. The end is here. Migrate now. Today's webinar is sponsored by Nasuni and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues. But if it doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd really like to draw your attention to three great resources from Nasuni. First, there's a link where you can find out more about how Nasuni can help with the StorSimple data migration. Then there's a PDF of a customer case study with Tgi Fridays and a link to a blog written by a Nasuni customer from the parent company of Urban Outfitters. So those are great resources there. You'll also find some links to Actual Tech Media resources like the Gorilla Guide Book Club and the ATM Event Center. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, at the end of this webinar, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So at the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to our fantastic content today. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters. We have Ann Blanchard, who's Senior Director of Product Marketing at Nasuni, and we have Paul Horn, who's Senior Director of the Microsoft Global Alliance for Nasuni. So Ann and Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Scott.
Hey, everybody.
Glad to be here.
Great to have you here. So Ann, I'm going to turn things over to you to take it away.
Great, Scott. All right. Well, I think what we have to start with, of course, is a countdown, because that is what we are facing if we are a StorSimple user today. If we advance to our next slide, it shows exactly how many days are left before Microsoft ends its support for StorSimple. We are reaching a true end of life for this product, and it's a real countdown, as Paul's about to explain. So what we're here today to talk to you about is where do you go from here? If you're a StorSimple user and you're looking at all the data you've put on this system over the years, what can you do? And what can you do in the short time frame that's left for you based on this real countdown from Microsoft? We have some practical advice. We have some ways to evaluate your alternatives, and we have some great success stories to share with you today. So please stay with us. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we're excited to share it all with you. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Paul. Paul, what is happening in December of 2022 based on what Microsoft is telling everyone?
Yeah, and that's the big question is, what actually happens on December 31st. So to give everyone a little bit of background on this, Microsoft announced in November 2019 at their annual customer conference Ignite that they were end of life and into supporting the StorSimple platform. That date is here, December 31st, 121 days away. What does that mean for you if you're running StorSimple today in your environment? Plain and simple, the service shuts down. So you have an appliance that is StorSimple appliance that you're accessing, a larger data set that sits in the StorSimple service in Azure behind it. That actual service will shut down. So the appliance will still be there, but at the end of the day, you're looking at not having the capability to actually go into the cloud management portal, looking at your settings related to volumes, accessing your shares, setting up shares and backup policies. You also lose access to your live data and the backups associated with that data. So this is not what you've seen in the past with, some technologies like, for example, when Microsoft went end of support on Windows Server 2003 or any of the Windows Server lines. Like that was okay. You're now running it unsupported after the date, right? And there's risk associated with that. This is not like that. This is, you will lose access to the data. You won't have any additional replacement parts, right? All of the ability to call Microsoft for support, that all goes away. All software updates for the platform. And by the way, I just also want to mention, right, this is not Nasuni talking about this. This is all publicly available on the Microsoft website. They actually just posted a blog post, which is in the links, and we're happy to provide that out as well. Actually, just about a month ago, they reposted this. So the end is near. And so, having said all that, so that we're able to understand where you all are in the process, and we'd love to obviously, kind of customize our presentation day a little bit to, some of the feedback from you all. We've got a poll that we'd like to put out there, and so I'll click next here. So we just love to understand where your organization is with your migration plan, right? Whether you've already migrated, great, good for you. Or you're looking at starting the migration soon, or you're in the process, whatever that is, we'd love to help. So feel free to get those answers in, and we're happy to dig in a little deeper. All right, we're getting some good feedback here. Give everyone another minute or so. All right, I am seeing some questions on what is StorSimple. We'll talk about that actually in a second.
Love it.
Yeah. All right. Looks like we're slowing down the responses. So I think we'll share the responses with you so everyone can kind of see, where everyone is at in the process. So as you can see, right, I mean, there are some people who have migrated. Great. That's really great to hear. And congratulations on completing that. Those who are going to be transitioned in the next, 30, 45 days, great. 69 days, you've got a plan. And if you haven't started yet, you know what? Let's, the time is now. So we can help walk through, what that looks like, and hopefully, provide some value to you and come up with some ideas on next steps. And even following the presentation, the Nasuni team is here to help with any migrations. We've done this for many customers. We'll talk about those here in a couple minutes. But Ann, I don't know if you want to flip it back to you for some additional.
Yeah, so we've got close to 40% of our listeners are really starting their migration process right now. We've got some others that are in process right now. The whole migration process is one that Nasuni is very, very familiar with, and we're going to be talking about that during this webinar. For those of you, regardless of where you are on your journey, here's a couple of questions to turn around and ask your team, kind of in light of the fact that Microsoft really is putting a hard stop on the StorSimple support, like Paul was pointing out, December 31st. What would be the business impact if StorSimple data became unavailable? That's kind of a very important question to ask right now, and share with your team, and get a good understanding of that. Secondly, how much time and effort are you willing to put into the migration? Because there are differences in your choices around who's doing the migration and how easy it is, and how much time you have may be determined by other priorities that you have other than StorSimple. And how much of the data do you really want to move, or i.e. continue to access versus just retire or archive? I think that's another really important question, Paul, that folks should look at right now as they look at this deadline. Really key thing we're going to get into also later on is, do you need more people to be able to access this data? And will you need to bring over your backups as well, because you have sort of a retention requirement on this data? And of course, always in the background, how much protection are you willing to provide for this data? Do you want to protect it if you can from a ransomware attack? So Paul and I just put these questions together as kind of a starting point to help you think about, how important this project is and where it fits in your priorities, and also the scope of it, just even before you get started. So let's take a moment, since we had 35% of our folks saying they didn't even, they weren't familiar with StorSimple, and step back and look at why was this product so successful both before and after Microsoft bought it, and why are people still on StorSimple? So back when StorSimple was introduced, it really introduced this revolutionary concept of tiering data to the cloud, i.e. making it much less expensive to store lots and lots of data on it. It optimized costs, it was designed for large amounts of data. The performance was good enough, if you needed to get access to your pictures or videos or whatever you were storing on it. And it was a simple solution, honestly. I mean, that the name actually means something. It moved data efficiently into the cloud, at a regular interval. And so partly because of this, it became kind of a favorite for a lot of companies to put large quantities of data, such as media, images, pictures, and share it out, but very inexpensively. The cloud was there to back it up. The cloud was there to handle the capacity. The cost was very affordable, and some of its features, of course, contributed to that. So fast forward to today, 121 days out of Microsoft ending that product, why are people still on it? And why do we have folks that have not migrated off, even though Microsoft's been telling all of us for 2 years now, we're going to end of life this product? Well, of course, it's still a low-cost solution, and who wants to make a move and spend money that you don't have to until the very last minute? That's a very understandable reason that we hear from our customers in this space. Data gravity, it's real. If you've got 800, 900 terabytes of data on your StorSimple system, just the prospect of moving all that data, or even a portion of that, is daunting. And why move it until you absolutely have to? Backup retention, maybe you just don't want to give up your access to your backup and your sort of long-term records that you've got. And last but not least, and this is one consideration that I hope Paul and I really addressed during this webinar, the fear of interrupting your business because you're in the process of migrating this data. If you're using it on a day-to-day basis, it's important to a subset of your company. The whole process of migration, people are afraid it's going to interrupt their business operations to do that. So we're going to address that as we go further into this topic here. Paul, why don't you share with folks, where's Microsoft coming down on all this? Because obviously they've put this deadline in place, but clearly they have some alternatives they want people to look at as they think about their migration options.
Absolutely, and actually, there are basically just a couple of options that you have as retaining that data and moving it over to a new platform. First and foremost, Nasuni and Azure is a great solution, and we'll actually dive into some more details on what that looks like and the incremental value that we can bring on top of what you may have already been receiving with the StorSimple deployment that you're running today. And then in addition to that, Microsoft has also recommended Azure File Sync as an option. And, quite frankly, you need to take a look at all the options on the table, right? It's not a lot. It's pretty easy to do the review for yourself. And we love to show you today, why we believe the Nasuni and Azure solution will be your best bet going forward. But the good news is you do have options, we'll definitely dig in on ours a little bit more. Happy to answer any questions as well that come up in Q&A around either one. But and we'll flip it back to you for a little bit of a dive into to our platform.
Yeah, so we took a few minutes to talk about why StorSimple was so attractive back when, right? It tiered storage files to the cloud. It put them in much less expensive object storage, but it still provided fairly good access performance for users that needed those files. It had a backup, add-on that you could do backups into the cloud with. So it had security, it had that access, and it had the capacity, and most of all, it had low cost. So it was very popular, many years ago when it was introduced. Think of Nasuni as like the third generation StorSimple with a lot of great additional benefits to it. Nasuni is a cloud native file data platform. Yes, it's backed in Azure Blob and public clouds in general, but it provides extremely fast access to your local users through the use of an edge caching architecture. So file access is actually, in many cases, faster than some people experience with their local network attached storage. But in addition to that, it has a lot of other capabilities that are kind of new and improved. Multi-site access, file locking, file synchronization, file sharing from site to site to site at very high speeds. In the background, Nasuni is doing all of your backup and version retention and an ability to dial back to very narrow increments of versions of files and provide extremely fast restores. If you need to dig back into your, your set of file changes back a couple of years, problem, Nasuni retains virtually every file change that you want it to, and with very little expense or additional cost. In addition to that, Nasuni as a cloud service provides the ability to layer on ransomware protection and access to users in remote locations, on mobile devices, and in hybrid workflows. So as a cloud native solution, Nasuni has a lot of additional features beyond what StorSimple offers, but probably the most key thing is that it's a cloud native architecture. It's not a tiering architecture the way StorSimple was designed. The file system itself, the global file system, is designed and built in the cloud. And here's where the differences really emerge, and you'll hear this from some of our customers. The differences really emerge in absolutely unlimited scalability around the numbers of files, the numbers of directories, the numbers of volumes, and most of all, the size of the volumes that you can put in the cloud, as well as the numbers of sites and the numbers of users. There's almost no constraints on the scalability of what you can build with a Nasuni File Data Platform. And we find, particularly with StorSimple users who've created such large data sets that, frankly, not as many people have access to maybe as they want, this is just a fantastic new place for them to take their data. So that's kind of a quick overview of the Nasuni File Data Platform, Paul. And Nasuni's been working very closely with Microsoft now for years as a top ISV partner. Maybe you could take our listeners through a little bit how Nasuni fits into the Microsoft landscape for file data solutions.
Absolutely, and actually that's the first question we get from our customers and even from some of the Microsoft teams that we work with is, hey, I've got OneDrive, I've got SharePoint, right? How does Nasuni play in that? And quite frankly, the answer is that, the larger the workloads, the more complex the workloads, and the more sites that you've got in a larger geographically dispersed area, the better it is to use Nasuni. We look at the different file types that you're operating in your environment, whether that's home directories, team shares, departmental file shares, all the way up into VDI file shares. If you've got that type of solution deployed in your environment, we find ourselves being a great fit where you start getting above that let's say 30, 50 terabyte line. You start seeing larger file workloads with larger files, especially with file workloads that are going to grow more and more. If you try and do that in SharePoint, for example, you're going to find you're going to hit those limits in SharePoint, and then you're going to quickly start having to pay Microsoft very large sums of money for the additional storage space in SharePoint. So that's actually one of the biggest feedback points that we got from our customers over the past couple of years is that they've had their SharePoint environments expand, and we can help to mitigate that issue and keep that data in Azure, right, but move it into the Nasuni platform to give you all the capabilities that Ann had just mentioned that we bring. So, crystal clear, we play very well with the Microsoft Azure environment, but we help to leverage the lowest tier storage in Azure and allow you to scale your environment and not take a hit on the performance that you might get as you're, trying to scale another solution. So actually, we also have one more slide on. Oh, and Ann, I was going to say, I want you to cover some of the details, right? Because it's one thing to put up a slide and a nice little graph chart and everything, but we wanted to also share some details with you. So Ann, I'll turn it to you.
No, that's great. I think the key thing that I want listeners to really zero in on is Azure Blob, because just like StorSimple, Azure Blob provides a very low cost, high capacity sort of back end for the files that you wanted to keep in StorSimple and may want to keep accessing. So let's not lose sight of that. That is a key low cost driver here. Okay, so we mentioned that Microsoft is pointing StorSimple customers towards two solutions, if you will, to move their StorSimple environment. Of course, they're going to point to their own Azure Files plus Sync kind of solution. That's a relatively new introduction offering that they've brought to the market. But they're also pointing folks towards Nasuni plus Azure Blob. And as Paul said, in general, for an enterprise solution, Nasuni plus Azure Blob is really the preferred solution. It's going to scale much better. The cost is going to be significantly lower than an Azure Files plus Sync solution once you go all in on all the features that you need. But let's take a look at those features, feature by feature, because we promised we'd help you with a comparison. So in terms of maximum number of volumes and capacity, Nasuni, as I said, is a cloud-native architecture. It's unlimited, but there is a 100 terabyte limit with Azure Files. Maximum file size, there is a limit with Azure Files. There is no file size limit with the Nasuni Azure Blob combination. That's actually material if you're working with media and you may have multi-gigabyte files or even terabyte files. Sometimes we do see that customers have trouble working with large file sizes outside of Nasuni. The maximum number of snapshots. Now, as I said, Nasuni, the way Nasuni works is it snapshots your file data at regular increments up to the cloud, where a gold copy is kept in Azure Blob or whatever public cloud you happen to be using. You can set those snapshots to be unlimited and to keep as many thousands, millions of them as you want, giving you a very granular record of all the file changes in the cloud. With Azure Files, that is limited to 200 snapshots. So after you reach that maximum, you're not going to be able to go back in time any further, and you're limited in terms of your overall sort of dial back capability. File size limited to, I'm sorry if I mentioned that earlier, but file size is limited to 4 terabytes with Azure Files, and it's unlimited with Nasuni. With deduplication, that is a key capability of Nasuni. We find on average our customers reduce their object storage requirement by up to 40%. That deduplication is not available with Azure Files, so you'll end up actually paying more for your object storage, or excuse me, for your cloud storage solution, which in this case is not Azure Blob, it's Azure File Storage, which is more expensive than Azure Blob. Backup and disaster recovery are included in Nasuni, not extra. They're part of the architecture. Nasuni allows sort of a natural ability to restore access to files, even if an access point goes down, i.e. one of its edge appliances at your location. It's very easy to spin up an edge appliance at another location or even in the cloud and restore full access to all the files that were being used by that location. It takes about 30 minutes. It's built into the product. It's a very simple procedure. So we have many customers who survived, power outages, floods, wind damage, whatever, very smoothly by simply invoking the disaster recovery capability, and they maintain access to those files. That's not included in the Azure Files plus Sync solution. That's a whole different set and separate additional set of investment that you would have to make. In terms of the maximum number of sites that are supported by Global File Lock is a capability of Nasuni that allows users to open files and prevent other users from changing, modifying those files while they're currently using them. So the Global File Lock is a great way to reduce conflict over file access. It's a great feature of Nasuni. You can opt to use it or not, but it's unlimited in terms of how you can apply it. That sort of locking capability, that conflict prevention capability, is not available in Azure Files. Mac support. Many folks using StorSimple are Mac users, have a Mac user base, and the file sharing and exchange and naming process, and basically ability to work across Windows and Apple Mac with Nasuni is excellent. And you just kind of get like basic support for the Apple file structure with Azure Files. And last but not least, Nasuni is very flexible in terms of how you deploy it. You can deploy it totally in the cloud. You can deploy it on premises with using a virtual machine on your at different locations. It's virtually unlimited in terms of the numbers of sites that you can deploy it across, just using a very lightweight virtual edge appliance. But Azure Files, you do have to set up a Windows file server at every location, and so that's sort of an additional maintenance and an additional cost that you're going to have to build into the solution. So this is a rundown of the features, and what I'll say is that overall, when folks that are looking at making a choice where they're going to take their StorSimple data, if they have a data set that's fairly large or used by a lot of end users in their organization, they choose Nasuni as a more of an enterprise solution. I don't know if you want to comment on that too, Paul.
Yeah, actually, and sorry, I just flipped to the next slide. But yes, no, and I agree, and it's our customers are definitely seeing us. I mean, we've had folks at Microsoft tell us that we're the enterprise version of Azure Files, for example. So, the solution definitely brings a lot more to the table than that one you can get through just your standard Azure File solution today.
Now, I mentioned, Paul, as you know, I mentioned just to go back to the opening slides that we had. Fear of migration is probably the number one reason why people haven't even started. So, let's talk about that.
Absolutely. And so, when it comes to customer migrations off of any platform, by the way, it's definitely can be challenging, and it can actually, bring more risks into the environment than you're used to having. And so the great news there is that Nasuni, even though we are a SaaS company, we actually have a services team dedicated to helping customers through the migration process. So this is not something that you have to go figure out how to do. We actually bring this team in as part of every single one of our engagements to ensure that our customers have the best experience, mitigate risks, and achieve the outcome that they set forth to achieve. And that is, make that data migration over to the Nasuni platform. As you can see, we have a great team. That's not the whole team. That's just pictures of several folks, but 150 years plus experience across that team. So we can help you take the risk out of moving your data and ensure that you have that great experience. So speaking of migrating data, we've got another poll question we wanted to ask everyone out there. And that is, how much file data is your organization migrating off of StorSimple? So we'll give everyone a couple minutes or a couple seconds to answer this. You can see the choices are, a petabyte or more. That would be a wildly large deployment. 500 petabytes, 500 terabytes to 900 terabytes, and then 999, 250 to 499 terabytes, and then less than 250 terabytes. thank you everyone for getting answers in. I can tell you we are seeing customers across the board. Some of the customers we'll be talking about, which is the next section that we'll get into here in a minute. We've got customers that are migrating petabytes. We have customers that are migrating 60 terabytes. So we've seen everything all in between. We've got, we're approaching 100 customers that we've helped migrate off the StorSimple platform. So we've done this quite a bit, and we've seen many different environments and sizes and types of data. So we have just 5 more seconds. Thank you everyone for getting your responses in. And we'll share the results here. So we've got a couple of large environments out there. And hopefully you've already started the migration process or completed it. But I do know we have customers actually out there with environments that are that size that we're actually in the process of moving or about to start. So, the sooner the better. And then I see we've got folks in the 500 to 999 terabyte range. And so it looks like a pretty good mix. So this was definitely an environment that, we saw a lot of customers, deployed, everything, and the data sets, tend to grow. Data tends to not shrink. And so it even started out at, 100 terabytes, and that is now, 500 terabytes today. That's kind of the norm based upon the fact that this was out in market for a long time, and customers definitely love to, put their data into the StorSimple environment. So thank you, everyone, for your feedback on that. And as promised, I think this is probably the most exciting part of the presentation, talking about our customers. And, we love all of our customers. Our customers, have great experiences with Nasuni, as a result of what we just talked about, the migration process. But we've got 2 specific customer examples that we want to talk about who were on StorSimple, loved the platform, saw the need to do the migration because of the end of support announcement. And so, Anne, I'll turn it over to you to talk about our first customer.
Oh, that's great. Okay, yes, let's talk about some success stories here and the challenges they went through and they overcame, Paul. This is great. So our first one up is Urban Outfitters. Urban Outfitters is a $2.7 billion retail giant. It owns, a number of very famous brands, Free People, Anthropologie, the Urban Outfitters line itself, and even some restaurants, Free Family restaurants and Newly Clothing. Lots and lots of properties here. And what happened is Urban Outfitters built a fantastic repository of image data, photography data, branding data on its StorSimple platform. And gradually that platform grew to close to 800 terabytes, actually over 800 terabytes eventually. So they had a large amount of data, just like some of our listeners do, on their StorSimple platform. They had 8,000 systems. And they decided when the announcement came out from Microsoft, okay, we're gonna migrate. So what they needed was access to that system. They had a number of users that wanted access to these images. They also had a number of places that were contributing data to the system, and they had photography studios all over the world that were contributing, sending up pictures. So they wanted more access to the data, and they had a large amount of it, and they wanted to continue using it as kind of a corporate resource. But they were also a little bit frustrated, frankly, with StorSimple because of the 64 terabyte volume limit, and they had to keep setting up new volumes and new volumes and new volumes every time they kind of went past the next 64 terabyte, mark. So what did they do? They came to Nasuni, they talked to us about a migration, and if we go to the next slide, great. If you go to this slide, I can just kind of show you what they did. They obviously chose the Nasuni platform as their single cloud architecture to replace StorSimple. And almost immediately, they were able to move over 300 terabytes into Azure and start using that on Nasuni. They purchased a 400 terabyte license. They moved 325 terabytes out in the first 90 days. So part of our using this example is to give our listeners, kind of the confidence that even if you are one of those large data set sites that answered Paul's poll. No problem. No problem with Nasuni. We'll get the data quickly and at scale into the Nasuni platform. You can start using it. If you've identified a subset of that data that's really important, we'll get that moved over first, and you can make that changeover. Subsequently, they migrated another 500 plus terabytes into Nasuni, and then they expanded Nasuni. And what they were able to do as a function of this, going back to some of those features of the Nasuni platform, is they're not only able to seamlessly migrate onto a new platform without interrupting access to the data from all their current users and get to, frankly, a lower cost platform with Nasuni and Azure Blob. They were also able to expand access to the data. So they could open it up beyond just a couple of sites and make the data available across the company to 9 or 10 locations that they all asked for access to this data. And as a consequence of that, sort of the value of the data went up, and it got more recognition and more usage, across the company, which was a really good sort of side effect of putting it in a modern platform. So this story resulted in ultimately them saving money, giving more access, and they were surprised that the performance, even though Nasuni is a cloud-based solution and they were concerned about cloud latency, because of the architecture here, they were actually finding that their remote users and their different locations had faster access to the files than they did with StorSimple. So a lot of benefits kind of accrued to them by modernizing the platform. Granted, it was a forced modernization from Microsoft's strategy here, but they were actually very, very happy enough to share their story with us about how the migration went and how they were able to use it afterwards. And we're sharing that story with our listeners on this Actual Tech webinar, because if you click on some of the resources associated with this, you can read the blog about their migration as well. So that's one great story. Very large data set, but a successful migration to the cloud for Urban Outfitters.
Excellent. And that's, they're a great customer of ours. They're still running Nasuni today, having a great experience. So it's always, great to dig in on, why they purchased Nasuni, what their experience was. And here you can see, right, migration, they got off to the races pretty quickly. So, there is one other customer I'd love to make sure that we have a chance to discuss, and that is Tgi Fridays. So, Anne, love to hear about their experience with migrating off StorSimple to Nasuni.
Well, of course, at Nasuni, we love having Tgi Fridays as a customer. It's been a lot of fun internally for us to go to this great restaurant chain and know that we're helping them with their corporate data. So what happened with Tgi Fridays, they're slightly more recent migration story than Urban Outfitters, but they were facing the same deadline as all of you are. They're a restaurant chain. 800 restaurants in 54 countries around the world, so a huge chain. But what they had at their corporate headquarters was a StorSimple device that was really a repository for corporate data that they wanted to share out to various key locations. It had very vital, corporate data on it, and it was important enough that they were very concerned if they migrated off of StorSimple, they would lose access to that data and interrupt business operations. So it was corporate file shares that people were accessing on a very regular basis. What happened with them, which was a great story, is that they chose Nasuni as their platform. The manager there set up the whole migration process with our Nasuni professional services and essentially migrated without the company even knowing. So we have a great quote from him here saying that, I actually won an award because we basically turned off StorSimple, turned on Nasuni, and nobody noticed. And it's a great story about how it does not have to be painful. It does not have to interrupt business operations. And the rest of the company went on with its access to that vital data, which now can grow without needing to be re-upped or reconfigured every 64 terabytes. And it's going to be much easier to add more locations as that restaurant chain grows, which we hope they do. Part of our resources for you today is a 2-page case study that Tgi Fridays graciously co-wrote with us to share their experience. So it's a great story about how they were able to migrate basically without end users being impacted at all, Paul. It's a really good story.
Absolutely, and we love to hear it. And the great news is that these are just two of many customers that we have. And here's just a small sample of some additional customers that we've helped to migrate off of their StorSimple environment into the Nasuni File Data Platform. We have many more customers behind them. And we try not to share a lot of our customer information publicly, but these customers have so graciously allowed us to share their logos and a little bit of their stories. So if you want to hear about other stories and other customer experiences, we're happy to have those discussions with you. But like I said, we're approaching about 100 customers that we've helped moved off the StorSimple platform, and so we know how to do it. We know how to make sure that you have a seamless experience and mitigate risk in the process. So, having said that, we just have just a couple more things that we wanted to talk about before we get into the Q&A session. And so, Anne, actually adding on to the content that we have out there in the handout section in the platform that we're on today, I wanted to also just make sure we talk about a piece of out there, the blog that our customer at Urban Outfitters helped us with.
That's right, Paul. And I think there were some surprises for Urban Outfitters that I wanted to share with our audience here today, because they had certain expectations, and in some ways the migration kind of reset their understanding of what a data migration had to be. Let me start with some of the specific feedback that we got and that we're getting from customers. One is that they're saving money moving to the cloud because of the deduplication and compression capabilities that actually result in them putting less data in the cloud. So their cloud storage costs are going down by moving to a modern solution. And in case there's any misunderstanding out there about that, if you're migrating, you do not have to pay egress charges for your hundreds of terabytes of data just to move it. There's a way to move it without going through that barrier at all. So do not worry about egress charges. It doesn't have to be painful. It really doesn't. Just like TGIFs, it happened kind of overnight. The end users didn't even know. And as I tried to explain, this was really something our friend Paul at Urban Outfitters wants other folks to understand too. There is a difference between a cloud tier solution and a cloud native solution. A cloud native solution is inherently, sort of infinitely expandable. A cloud tiered solution always is going to have that delay, always is going to have that sort of two-step process that will ultimately slow down your access to the data and in some ways, increase your costs. Access for remote workers. We're all working in hybrid work environments these days. I mean, that's the reality of our world right now. And you may have a number of users or new acquisition employees that want access to your great data that you've stored on StorSimple. And now we make that much easier than with StorSimple using the Nasuni platform. And as Paul said, wherever you're at in your journey right now, talking to people who have done these migrations, like you said, we've done close to 100, it's going to help you with your planning. It's going to help you with your setting it up so that it's as seamless as possible. And that's partly what we're here for, too. We're here to make the whole process easier. And we're really glad that that's how our customers have seen it so far working with us. So with that, I think we just kind of want, Paul and I just kind of want to summarize for you what to take away from all of this, and then we're both looking forward to answering your questions.
Excellent. So and I mean, this is our last slide. 121 days to go. Right? Why reach out to us? Why set up a conversation with a member of our team? First of all, you've heard a lot today about how we're able to help customers migrate. Right? We do that every day, all the time, many customers off the StorSimple platform, so we can make it fast and easy for you. In addition to that, all the additional value that we bring as part of the Nasuni platform and backed by our cloud object storage providers just allows for more flexibility, greater scalability, and greater accessibility to your data. So with that concept alone, we're able to bring additional value on top of the environment that you're running in today. And then lastly, because we're leveraging those cheaper tiers of cloud storage, we are able to show our customers a significant cost savings when we help do the comparison between their environment today and what it would look like running in Nasuni. And so, please, again, reach out to us. And I'd love to get your take on anything. I know we've got a great little graphic on here as showcasing all the different features that we've already talked about, but it might help to kind of finalize on that and then jump into Q&A.
I mean, absolutely. Just some core benefits we'll leave you with in this slide. This is global. It's global infrastructure. That's how Nasuni is designed. But it doesn't really matter if you're starting with 20 terabytes. You're going to appreciate that you can access it from anywhere and store it cheaply and whatever. So this is a more modern platform than StorSimple, and it's less expensive, and you've got all this additional functionality that comes with it. So we're really excited to talk to you about moving to a better place, if you will, if you want to contact us after this webinar. But now, Paul, let's just see what kind of questions we've got from our listeners here and see if we can answer those.
Okay, great. Well, Ann and Paul, great presentation. And in among the audience questions here, we've got comments from Lise and Venkat saying that those were impressive stories. And, just that aligns with my reaction to that quote from Michael at TGIF, that idea of doing the migration and no one noticed. I mean, that's the IT dream. So first question here, after the December 31st cutoff date, what happens to the files and data that my company has stored locally on our StorSimple device? It does seem hard to believe. I mean, you've got the physical device. What happens?
So any of the data that is cached locally on the device will still be accessible for a undetermined amount of time. So that's what's scary about this, is that the testing that Microsoft has done hasn't gone beyond more than a couple days to a couple weeks. They haven't tested it out to see what happens to the cache if you take a StorSimple appliance offline for months or never allow it to access the cloud service again. So there is definitely uncertainty there. So I would not put yourself in a situation where you're looking at potential data loss. Okay.
Super. And before we get to our next question, I'm just going to put up a more information poll, and then don't worry, everybody, we will come back to that slide with the link on it. But we had a question here from Deb, who was wondering about implementation time. How long does it take to complete a migration from StorSimple to Nasuni's platform?
That's a good question. It really depends on your environment and the amount of data that you're looking at. The different data types, we are able to do an analysis on the data set that you're looking to migrate and help determine what that time frame looks like. I can tell you it's again, it really depends on the workload. But if you could be looking at anywhere from a couple of weeks to months. For example, I think one of the fastest migrations I've seen is 10 petabytes in 10 months. That wasn't necessarily from StorSimple, but that's the size of the data migrations that we're able to do. Having said that, though, that's probably not the norm for most customers, and it definitely comes with some added costs with having to scale up some cloud services to help complete that migration. But at the end of the day, for the traditional store workloads, StorSimple workloads, I would say it's really going to depend on the data set. And, if you're dealing with a petabyte of data, you need to start literally today. If you're dealing with, 50 terabytes of data, don't delay, but you're probably not looking at 4 or 5 months. So.
Okay.
Well, I'd just like to add to that, what don't want listeners with those large data sets to maybe be afraid of, if you will, is the cost of migration is not linear related to how much data you have. There's a correlation for sure, but the way that Nasuni does it, we set you up, we get you ready, we migrate your critical data. We also, at a key point, will make you self-sufficient, so you can keep moving the data yourself. So you don't have to assume that because you have a petabyte of data, it's going to cost you 1,000 times more than a terabyte of data. That's not the way it works. There's a flattening off and a plateauing so that your cost of migration is manageable and as budgetable as possible.
Okay. All right. Super. Next question comes from Ross, who's asking, the access anywhere sounds very appealing, but how does that work in practice?
How does that work in practice? Well, at a broad level, the way the Nasuni architecture works is you can set up a virtual machine in the cloud to give access to users anywhere in the globe. It's an internet-based access of the files. Files are chunked and accelerated so that you can pull them out of the cloud at very high speeds. So literally wherever you have access to a cloud over the internet, you can access Nasuni. Now, that being said, I'm not sure if the listeners looked us up, on Google a few minutes ago, but we did just do a product announcement called Access Anywhere, which is an additional set of capabilities that we've introduced for the hybrid work environment. And that all relates to individual productivity at your home or remote office in terms of syncing up locally and being able to manage your files locally. Those capabilities relate to integration with Microsoft Teams. And there's also a set of capabilities around accelerated file transfer, which is sort of additional speed and beyond the Nasuni level of speed. So we have a whole set of hybrid work functionality we've introduced very recently with Access Anywhere that you can layer on top of your basic sort of Nasuni functionality, which is because it's a cloud solution, you can access your data from anywhere in the world.
Okay, super. Next question comes from Brandon, who's wondering, can Nasuni manage permission and sharing much like how Google does with Google Drive?
We basically use, the access controls that whatever that you've got, your single sign-on capability. We tap into whatever your access control systems are that you have with your files. We fit in under those, so it's sort of invisible in that sense.
Okay. All right, super. Next question here, do you have a way to analyze the hard and soft costs associated with moving to your technology?
I'll say absolutely. I mean, Paul can chime in too, but we will prepare for you a whole estimated business impact statement, which maps out the costs of the migration, the costs of moving to Nasuni, the comparative costs if you have another solution you're looking at, in this case, Azure Files. We have a very good understanding of their cost structure. We'd be happy to give you a detailed assessment of the, sort of the entire shift and what your costs going forward would be as well. We're very happy to do that.
Okay. And thanks to everybody who answered the poll question. I did just want to put back up the Learn More link for everybody as well. Let's see. Here's another question. I'm with a public library. Do you have different pricing structure for organizations like libraries?
Paul,
so that's a great question. Yeah, and I can chime in on that one. We do have many customers in state and local government, higher education customers as well. And so our team would be happy to reach out and have a conversation with you about what that could potentially look like. Officially, it's not a differing pricing structure. We have a standard structure across all of our customers, but we would be happy to have a detailed conversation with you around that. So please definitely feel free to reach out.
Okay, super. And this next one comes from Jeff, who's wondering, what size is your max storage currently? And how many customers are sort of, up or near that top end?
So the great news on that one is that it's unlimited. We are constrained only by the cloud storage provider technologies. So in this case, as long as they're continuing to add more storage, we're able to take advantage of that. And so I will tell you, we do have customers. I know I used an example earlier. We do have customers that are running at petabyte scale. Customers today are dealing with tens of petabytes, not even just a petabyte. From a max storage perspective, the sky's the limit with regards to your needs.
Fantastic. That's great. We've probably, we're coming up on time here, so we probably got time for one more question. So, maybe a good one would be just sort of what are some of the best practices as far as what's needed to get started with a migration and at the same time to get started with Nasuni.
So, the first one is don't delay. We are at the deadline. It is, I can't make that more clear. I know I've personally had many conversations on behalf of our customers with Microsoft to understand what's coming with this. What is out there is what is out there, period. It is, the service will shut down on December 31st, 2022. This is not, extension time. Like, the time is now to start. So if you haven't started, reach out to us. We're happy to have those conversations, and we can move very quickly to help you. If you've already started that process, great. Continue on it and get that thing done and fully migrated by December 31st.
Okay. All right. Well, Ann, Paul, thank you so much for coming on and bringing us up to speed on the 121 days remaining that people have to get it together and how Nasuni can help with that deadline and those issues. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Scott. Yep, it's a real deadline, so we appreciate the time to spend with your listeners. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Well, have a great day.
You too.
Thanks. All right. And as we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that gift card today is Mark Olivares from California. So congratulations to Mark. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Nasuni for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.